May the words of our mouths and meditations of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, the light of our life. Amen. So those of us who spend a lot of time in church or reading the Bible, you know this story, this transfiguration story. We read it every year just before Lent begins, as Epiphany ends, and it seems like a pretty public event. Our church council, St. Mark's Council, got away for a retreat over Friday and Saturday, and we read this story Friday night. We read it again 2 more times on Saturday. We got to know the story fairly well. We talked about it. And it seems like a pretty public event. But it's not so public, right? Because how many people did Jesus take with him up on the mountain to pray? 3, yeah. So it's a very few. It's just a few people who witnessed this spectacular spectacle, this light-bearing event. In Luke, this is an epiphany. It's an epiphany moment. It's an aha moment. Say the disciples, this is who Jesus is, especially in relationship to God, in relationship to Moses and Elijah, in relationship to us. This is who Jesus is. Luke's story begins with that wish of Jesus to go pray. He and his disciples have been through a lot already. They've been healing, they've been teaching, they've been doing all sorts of things. But Jesus says, all right, let's get away for a little bit of a retreat. Let's go up on the mountain. I read that gospel quickly, but in the Greek it is the mountain. Like we're supposed to know what the mountain is. Maybe it's the place that those fishermen always went to. Maybe Peter had a little place away up in the mountains, like some of you have a place in the mountains, a place to get away to. Maybe they went up the mountain because whenever Jesus came to Galilee, there was the mountain that Jesus always went to. Or maybe for Jewish people, every mountain that is cloud covered or has some lightning and thunder around it becomes the mountain after that Mount Sinai event, where you go to the Great Smoky Mountains and you experience God's presence like no other time. Anyway, it says they went up the mountain, whatever that means. And while they're up there wasn't just a single candle that glowed, thanks to our acolyte Elena helping that candle to glow. There was this radiant light, a dazzling light. Dazzling, it says. That dazzling light that made Jesus' face change, his clothes become dazzling. It's like we sang at Christmas time, right? Silent night, holy night. All is calm, all is bright. Round yon Virgin Mother and Child. It's all is bright around the mother and child, around the Virgin Mother. All is bright around them. They have that certain glow that new mothers and babies have. They have that certain glow that artists throughout the centuries, Christian artists, always depict Jesus with a glow around him, a halo around him. He has this glow, this transfiguring glow. At Christmas time, we also sing songs that say, Hail the Son, S-U-N, Son of Righteousness. And we sing light and life to all he brings and light of light eternal. Songs and hymns that remind us of Jesus' glow, this transfiguration moment. Because it doesn't last forever, especially in the Gospel of Luke. But for now, the spotlight is on him, and then 2 other guys show up. The 2 others are Moses and Elijah. The Old Testament characters. Moses, the lawgiver, the one who went up on the mountain, whose face shone with Jesus as he brought down the 10 Commandments the second time, after the first time he crashed them down and broke them because of the people's disobedience and the problems that Moses saw. But his face was shining the second time he came down. And then Elijah, the prophet. And these guys appear in that light like it's a veil of space that's lifted because of the light of Christ. They all appear in glory, Luke says, which is to say that they appeared in this white-hot sphere of light, and this light had given them their lives, just like the light of Christ gives us our lives. Yet the topic of their conversation that day was not about life, but it was about death. They show up and they start having this conversation, and they say, and Luke says they were talking about Jesus' departure or Jesus' exodus, which he was about to not die, but about to accomplish. his exodus which he's about to accomplish. With Moses standing right there, the parallel was hard to miss. Jesus, like Moses before him, was about to set God's people free, about to lead a new exodus. Only it was not bondage to a Pharaoh in Egypt that they were needing freeing from this time. It was bondage to their own sin and fear and death, which crippled them far worse than leg chains ever had. In the spotlight, we had people this week on the news in negative spotlights. Robert Kraft, Michael Cohen, you can continue to name others in negative spotlights. Hopefully you also saw and witnessed people in positive spotlights as well. People serving, people praying, people helping someone else. People maybe you noticed in your life that you would like to shine a spotlight on, just to say thank you. Thank you, Congregation Council, for being in the spotlight at St. Mark's in many and various ways, especially Friday and Saturday during this retreat. Our Congregation Council talked about sometimes making decisions and about maybe making a decision or a choice and then maybe backtracking on it later, or at least in past councils, that seemed to be some of what was going on, and just the struggle with that. And so we talked about the why. Why are these council members called and chosen and elected to serve as council members? Why are they leading with a purpose? Why do they face tough decisions? Why do they sometimes feel threatened or fearful? And so no decision gets made. Those are some of the things that we talked about while they were in the spotlight over the weekend. Someone suggested that this council might be more strong or more courageous like those disciples were in their decision-making or in our decision-making. Someone else took me aside and said that maybe a good slogan for us Lutherans in general and for the Congregation Council too might be, Lutherans, grace sets us free. You'll have to fill in your own ending though. Grace sets us free to be, grace sets us free to do, grace sets us free from, grace sets us free for. You fill in your own ending. And Martin Luther would love it, by the way, that grace aspect. Anyway, on the Transfiguration Mountain, God planned another Exodus, another grace-filled, light-filled freedom movement. But this next time it would not be from Egypt. It would be from Jerusalem. It would be where this new Red Sea of death, Red Sea of Christ's blood, would be split wide open with a cross, and Jesus would lead his people through. The other guy shining on the mountain was Elijah the prophet. Elijah marked the divine seal of approval for this plan. He was the one whose appearance meant the long-awaited Messiah was here. Elijah had never died. He was whisked up to heaven in a chariot once upon a time. So to see Elijah standing there with Moses and Jesus was like seeing the Mount Rushmore of heaven. The lawgiver, the prophet, the Messiah, the big three wrapped in such glory. It's a wonder that the three disciples could see anyone at all. But Peter and James and John did see that epiphany. And then they could not see anything because the clouds swallowed them up. It was still God's glory, only it was not dazzling light now. It was dazzling darkness. Dazzling darkness. For us, dazzling light and dazzling darkness are opposites, but for God, I think they're the same. Even the darkness is not dark to God. And then later, when Jesus' exodus got underway, and these disciples saw what it meant for him, when they saw that shining face all bloodied and spat upon, and they saw his brilliant, dazzling clothes all ripped to shreds, I'll bet they had to rethink what that glory was all about. His face did not shine on the cross. No chariot of fire swooped down to carry him away like it did Elijah. And you have to wonder about that. Why did God hide all the glory on the mountain where no one could see? Why didn't God save it for the cross? I guess maybe because then it would lead to a different kind of death for Jesus. A different kind of death than most of us will die. And that just would not have worked. To lead our exodus, to grant us an exodus, a freedom a freedom from sin, a freedom from fear, a freedom from death. Jesus had to die like we do, alone, with no particular glory. Otherwise, he would have been an anomaly instead of Messiah. And it would have been hard for us to see what he has in common with the rest of us. As it was, he died very much like those who died on either side of him. The end of Luke's gospel says that one thief on the cross asked to be spared from what was coming, while the other thief said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." Jesus could not do anything for the one who wanted to be spared, but he did a great favor for the other. He told him that the darkness was a dazzling darkness with paradise in it for both of them, and then some. I think it was something he had learned on that mountain of transfiguration, when light burst through all his seams and showed him what he was made of, and showed the disciples who he was and is. It was something he never forgot. He never forgot that voice from the cloud that said, "You are my beloved, you are my chosen, you are my child, you are my servant leader, you are mine, you are you." Listen to that voice to you, calling to you, saying you are God's beloved, that you are God's chosen, that you are God's servant leaders, council members and congregation members, friends and family, that you are blessed by this God of radiant light, with dazzling light and with times of dazzling darkness. Because we have been allowed to intrude on this not-for-public event. It was just 3 disciples along with Jesus. But someone thought we needed a dose of glory to get us through dark nights, to get us through cloudy days, to get us through days and clouds of unknowing, to get us through death, to get us through fear, to get us through our sinfulness, to help send us out then like these children were sent out a while ago, reminding others that God's light shines in you, that God's light is for you. Some people are lucky enough to witness it for themselves. Although, like Peter, James, and John, very few of them will talk about it later. What the rest of us have are stories like this Transfiguration one, and the chance to decide for ourselves, or like our congregation council, a chance to decide what our next steps are for our congregation, or even for life and faith. It's a lot to believe. It's a lot to wrestle with. To believe that God calls us to listen to his beloved Son. To believe that God calls us beloved in the waters of baptism and the exodus freedom of grace that Jesus gives us through the cross over sin, fear, and death. To believe that God's lit up life includes even death and a paradise. To believe that even the darkness can dazzle. To believe.